35 years ago, Margaret Thatcher gave a short speech here at Lancaster House. She spoke of her optimism about the changes taking place between East and West. Barely 2 weeks later, the Berlin Wall fell. It was the dawn of a new era. Existential threats were banished, and a new global feel-good factor for defence had begun. This was the age of the peace dividend. The notion that while our defences should be maximised at times of tension, they could be minimised in times of peace. Now, conflict didn't disappear, of course, but with no great power menacing the world, peace gave the impression of being just around the corner. Yet, not everybody got the memo. In fact, our adversaries were mobilizing. The belligerent autocratic state was making a comeback. Having got away with his illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, an emboldened Putin launched his brutal invasion of Ukraine 8 years later. And as Russia continues its illegal campaign in Ukraine, China is assessing whether the West loses its patience. Today, Russia and China have been joined by new nuclear and soon-to-be nuclear powers. North Korea, promising to expand its own nuclear arsenal. And then there is Iran, whose enriched uranium is up to 83.7%, a level at which there is no civilian application. Back in the days of the Cold War, there remained a sense that we were dealing with rational actors. But these new powers are far more unstable, irrational. Can we really assume that the strategy of mutually assured destruction that stopped wars in the past will stop them in the future when applied to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard or North Korea? I am afraid we cannot. Particularly since there is now another new worrying consideration. Our adversaries are more connected with each other. For example, we've seen how Iranian proxies are causing havoc from Israel to the Red Sea. That Russia has what the two countries describe as a no-limits partnership with China, with whom they conduct regular joint exercises. Meanwhile, Putin is relying on Iranian drones and North Korean ballistic missiles to fuel his illegal bombardments in Ukraine. For friends like these, the world is becoming more dangerous and has done in recent years. But the other threats that plagued us at the start of the 21st century, well, they haven't gone away either. The spectre of terrorism and threats from non-state actors, as October the 7th showed, still haunts the civilized world. Put it all together, and these combined threats risk tearing apart the rules-based international order established to keep the peace after the Second World War. Today's world, then, is sadly far more dangerous, with the UN reporting that we are facing the highest number of violent conflicts since the Second World War. Now, some argue these threats are not existential to the UK, and yet what happens elsewhere quickly happens here. In the past few years, we've seen terrorist attacks on the streets of London, attempted assassinations in Salisbury, theft of intellectual property, attempted interference in our political processes, a cost of living crisis brought to you by Putin that's hurting families here at home. And now, our trade, 90% of which comes by sea, is the target of terrorists. proving that not only do our adversaries have the intent to target us, but they have a widening array of weapons with which to wreak havoc. In our online world, our adversaries don't need to fire a missile or board a submarine or strap into a fighter jet to hurt us. Cyber warfare simply means hacking into our networks and watching the economic carnage unfold. Last year, almost a third of British businesses suffered a cyber attack or breach. And the total cost to the UK economy, well, that runs into billions. We know a significant number of those attacks come from Russia and China, where they're also developing satellite killing technology capable of degrading us from space. Even mass migration can be cynically used as a weapon of war, as Poland, Norway, and Finland have been experiencing. In other words, nation-states plus non-state actors with greater connections between them, plus more creative weapons, all adds up to a much more troubled world. And over the last decade, this government has made great strides in turning around that defence tanker. The refreshers of the Integrated Review and the Defence Command Paper have been instrumental in ensuring that Britain is defended in this more dangerous world. We've uplifted our defence spending, investing billions into modernising our armed forces and bringing in a raft of next-generation capabilities, from our new aircraft carriers to F-35s, from new drones to the Dreadnought submarine programme, from better trained troops to the creation of a national cyber force. And when the world has needed us, we have risen to the moment, giving Ukraine unwavering support and galvanising others to their cause, including with our biggest ever funding package, announced just last week. Taking action, we've worked to stamp out the global ambitions of Daesh. We've acted on the forefront of the global response to maintaining regional stability after October the 7th by sending a Royal Navy task force group, a company of Royal Marines, surveillance planes, and life-saving aid to Gaza. And taking a lead role within the global forces to protect freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. Not only that, but we've also strengthened Britain's place in the world with expanded partnerships from the Gulf to the Indo-Pacific. We're playing a major part in stirring the West into a renewed commitment to defence, using our 2014 NATO summit in Newport to bring the alliance nations together to stop the rot, by committing to spending 2% of GDP on defence. Today, for the very first time, the government is spending more than £50 billion a year on defence, in cash terms, more than ever before. And we've made the critical decision to set out our aspiration to reach 2.5% of GDP on defence, and as we stabilise and grow this economy, we'll continue to strive to reach that as soon as possible. But now is the time for all allied and democratic nations across the world to do the same thing and ensure their defence spending is growing too. Because, as discussed, the era of the peace dividend is over. In 5 years' time, we could be looking at multiple theatres, including Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. Ask yourself, looking at today's conflicts across the world, is it more likely that that number grows or reduces? I suspect we all know the answer. It's likely to grow. So 2024 must mark an inflection point. For Ukraine, this will be a year when the fate of their nation may well be decided. For the world, this will be the greatest democratic year in history, with nearly half of the world's population actually going to the polls. And for the UK, it must also be a moment to decide the future of our national defences. The choice is stark. Some people, especially on the left, have a tendency to talk Britain down. They believe Britain can no longer have the power to influence world events, that we should somehow shrink into ourselves and ignore what's happening beyond our shores. I passionately believe these unpatriotic, Britain-belittling doom-mongers are simply wrong. Their way would lead us sailing blindly into an age of autocracy. So we must make a different choice. And the history of our great island nation actually shows us the way. Britain has often accomplished the seemingly impossible before. Our history is littered with moments when we face down the threat and we have triumphed. But looking ahead, we are in a new era, and we must be prepared to deter our enemies, to lead our allies, and defend our nation. In terms of deterrence, it's about the UK gaining a strategic advantage over our enemies. The foundation of that advantage is, of course, our nuclear enterprise. At a time of mounting nuclear danger, our continuous at-sea deterrent provides the ultimate protection. And that's why we're spending around £31 billion to bring in the next generation dreadnought submarines and upgrade our deterrent. In a more contested world, we need to bring the same goal of deterrence to our conventional forces. So we've made modernisation a critical priority, taking the long-term compatibility decisions that we need to transform our armed forces into a formidable deterrent, enabling them to maintain the UK's strategic advantage, empowering them to be able to deliver the outcomes we need in multiple theatres at once. The growing success of that world was powerfully shown last week when, in less than 24 hours, the United Kingdom was able to both take action to defend ourselves against the Houthis and uplift support to Ukraine to new record levels. If Putin thought that we would be distracted by events in the Middle East than last week because of the long-term decisions this government has taken, his hopes were surely dashed. In a complex world, no nation can afford to go it alone. So we must continue to strengthen our alliances so the world knows they cannot be broken. Defence is in many ways the cornerstone of our relations across the globe. Our world-leading armed forces, cutting-edge industrial base, willingness to support our allies is the reason why Britain is the partner of choice for so many. And amongst our partnerships, NATO remains preeminent. 75 years after its foundation, today's NATO is bigger than ever. But the challenges are bigger too. And that's why the UK has committed nearly the totality of our air, land, and maritime assets to NATO. But in 2024, I'm determined to do even more. And that's why I can announce today the UK will be sending some 20,000 personnel to lead one of NATO's largest deployments since the end of the Cold War. Exercise Steadfast Defender. It will see our military joining forces with counterparts from 30 NATO countries, plus Sweden, providing reassurance against the Putin menace. Our carrier strike group will be out in full force with our magnificent flagship HMS Queen Elizabeth leading the way. And flying from her decks will be the 5th generation F-35 Lightning jets, accompanied by a fearsome phalanx of frigates, destroyers, and helicopters. We'll also have a submarine patrolling the depths and one of our Poseidon P-8 conducting surveillance from the skies above. And more than 400 of our brilliant Royal Marines will be training in the Arctic Circle, contending with some of the toughest environments anywhere on the planet. On land, we'll be deploying over 16,000 light merchant mechanized brigade combat team from the 7th Light Infantry, which superbly led our recent response in Kosovo. All of which makes this our largest deployment of land forces to NATO in 40 years. But NATO is only part of our rich tapestry of partnerships. And this government has taken bold decisions to embark on the partnerships we need to defend ourselves from a more dangerous world. We're rapidly building our AUKUS partnership. And last month, I signed a Global Combat Air Partnership, or GCAP, with Japan and Italy. These projects are not just about building nuclear-powered sub-6th-generation fighter planes and innovating in all forms of defense. They're about sharpening our strategic edge so we can maintain our advantage over our adversaries. They are precisely the deep relationships needed to preserve national and regional security. And they're emblematic of the way that we will work in the future. But it's not enough to simply deter. We must also lead. Standing up for our values around the world, and Ukraine is a test case. This year, its future may well be decided. Valiant Ukrainian warriors have been incredible, successful in pushing back invading Russian forces, retaking 50% of the territory stolen by Russia, opening up a maritime passage in the Black Sea. But the West must not let them down. British leadership has already had a galvanizing effect. We've convened some 10 countries to help Ukraine train here in the UK. And today, I can announce that our programs have now trained over 60,000 Ukrainian troops since Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine in 2014. Last month, I launched a new maritime coalition with Norway to defend Ukraine's maritime flank. Since then, over 20 partner nations have joined that coalition. But the international community cannot let this support slip. Putin believes the West lacks staying power. And since the future of the world order is at stake, we must prove him wrong. Rewarding his war with victory would only increase the risk of escalation, not only because he's hell-bent on rebuilding Russia's empire, but because it would send a signal to others, a signal of weakness to all would-be aggressors. That is why on Friday, the Prime Minister signed the historic UK-Ukraine Agreement on Security Cooperation, the start of a 100-year alliance that we're building with our Ukrainian friends. It sees us increasing our military support to £2.5 billion, taking the total military support and aid to £7 billion, with even more gifted directly from the UK's equipment inventory. £200 million will be pressed into producing and procuring thousands of drones, including surveillance and long-range strike drones. And this continues the UK's proud record as a leading donor, always being the first to get Ukraine exactly what they need. The UK was the first to provide Ukraine with weapons training, the first to provide NLAW anti-tank missiles, the first to give modern tanks, the first to send long-range missiles. Now, we will become the largest provider of drones too. These will be manufactured here in the UK, in tandem with international partners, helping to enhance our unmanned vehicle capabilities at home too. But our new agreement with Ukraine is about so much more than money. It formalises our support in everything from intelligence sharing and cyber to security to medical and military training. And it sees us take the first giant step towards a century-long partnership. Britain understands that the battle in Ukraine is existential. It proves there is no such thing as an isolated conflict, and that to shore up the international order, we must be able to act globally. So, just as we were there to help evacuate British citizens from Sudan last year, just as we're working with partners to ensure the territorial integrity of our Commonwealth ally, Guyana, we have also been a critical part of the US-led international operation to protect freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Some 15% of the world's shipping passes through these narrow shipping lanes. But the Houthis have persistently violated the law, menacing commercial vessels in the region. In the Red Sea, we've seen how brilliant the Royal Navy have been acting in self-defense against the intolerable and growing number of Houthi attacks. And earlier this month, the world sent a very clear message to the Iranian-backed Houthis. End your illegal and unjustified actions. Stop risking innocent lives. Cease threatening the global economy. We could not have been clearer with our warnings, which they chose to ignore, and enough was enough. So last Thursday, the Prime Minister and I authorised RAF precision strikes using 4 RAF Typhoons, FGR-4s, and supported by 2 Voyager air refuelling tankers. The result is that the Houthis have been dealt a blow. Our decisive response in the Red Sea and our uplifting support for Ukraine offer a direct blueprint for how the UK must continue to lead in the future, offering our unwavering support to our allies and, in times of struggle, galvanising global response to any malign actors seeking to break the rules-based international order, and acting decisively when the moment calls for us to defend ourselves. So, deter and lead, which brings me to the final essential element of being prepared: defending our nation. If we are to defend our homeland, we must ensure our entire defence ecosystem is ready. Firstly, we must make our industry more resilient to empower us to rearm, to resupply, to innovate far faster than our opponents. There's a huge opportunity here for British industry. The UK has long been a byword for pioneering technologies. We gave the world the radar, jet engines, the World Wide Web. And we've not lost our spark for creativity. On the contrary, today the UK is one of 3 $1 trillion tech economies. But just imagine what we could do if we managed to better harness that latent inspiration, ingenuity, invention for the defence of our nation. Just think about the game-changing tech we could supply to our brave men and women. From the pilots ready to scramble at a moment's notice, to the soldiers protecting NATO's flank from Putin's fury, to the sailors deployed across the 7 seas to secure our prosperity, to our absolutely essential Royal Marine Commandos, without whom we could not properly defend our nation, to those you will never see and never know, but who are out there giving their all on your behalf. They are the cornerstone of our defence, and we owe them an unimaginable debt of gratitude. Which is why my commitment to getting them what they deserve is iron cast. After all, our great resource has always been the men and women who work tirelessly to protect our nation. But to defend our nation from the increasing dangers of tomorrow, they must have what they need to do the job. And that's why this Conservative government has always and has already taken vital steps to increase defence spending, approving the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, injecting a further £5 billion last year to replenish our stocks and modernise our nuclear enterprise, delivering the largest cash terms defence budget, spending over £50 billion on the defence of our nation. And just last week, not only maintaining our support to Ukraine, but increasing it to the highest level ever. To some, the costs may seem steep, but Britain cannot afford to reverse the gains we've made. And under this Conservative government, we never will. And we'll use our influence to ensure that other allies and friends, faced with this new reality, keep up their commitment to NATO too. So we find ourselves at the dawn of this new era. The Berlin Wall, a distant memory, and we've come full circle, moving from a post-war to pre-war world. An age of idealism has been replaced by a period of hard-headed realism. Today, our adversaries are busy rebuilding their barriers. Old enemies are reanimated. New foes are taking shape. Battle lines are being redrawn. The tanks are literally on Europe's Ukrainian lawn, and the foundation of the world order is being shaken to their core. We stand at this crossroads, whether to surrender to a sea of troubles or do everything we can to deter. I believe, in reality, it's no choice at all. To guarantee our freedoms, we must be prepared to deter. The enemies are gathering around us. We need to ensure that we lead our allies in whatever conflicts are to come, defend our nation, whatever threat should arise. This is what Britain has always done, and it is what we must do again if we, like Margaret Thatcher speaking here 35 years ago, are once again going to be able to dream of that future without walls. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming this morning. We have a number of members of the press here. I'm given a list. I'm going to go to Jonathan Beale at BBC first. Jonathan.
Thank you, Secretary of State. It was a very comprehensive picture of the threats facing the UK. What there wasn't was a commitment. I mean, you've said you're spending 50 billion, but if you look at the MOD's finances at the moment, there is, according to the NAO, an 18 billion black hole in your budget. You, at the moment, are looking at retiring some ships early, at mothballing the only 2 assault ships. There is, in the words of one of your own ministers, a crisis in recruitment, and yet you're asking the armed forces to do more with less. A lot of the new kit you mentioned doesn't come online until the 2030s. So why aren't you meeting that 2.5% pledge that you say you want to meet? Why can't you do that here now? And then secondly, just quickly on the Red Sea, you say you've dealt the Houthis a blow, but it's clearly not a decisive blow. How much, do you envisage that you will have to take military action again and conduct another set of strikes in the near future? Thank you.
Jonathan, thanks very much. Look, on spending, first of all, to be clear, we are spending more than we've ever spent before. We are also comfortably well over the 2% nowadays. And as I said in the speech, we are aiming for 2.5% as economic conditions allow. In other words, we've gone through a massive recapitalisation programme. I'm looking at our service chief sat on the front row here. Each of the services has been massively recapitalised in turn. You mentioned ships and retirement. I'm pleased you mentioned, because I just want to clear this up once and for all. I keep seeing this linger around. Yes, it's true that we'll have to make decisions. None have been taken yet. But frigates, for example, which were designed to operate for 18 years and had been operating twice that long, are not being retired early, if indeed they are, and any government has to make a sensible decision about, and the First Sea Lord, I'm sure, will be saying this, about whether you want to put ships into maintenance, which takes years, in order to bring them out after brand new ships are already in the line. So I think there are sensible decisions there. The landing ships, the LPDs, there is no decision. They are not going to be scrapped. I keep reading the story that they're being scrapped, and so that's not the case. And as ever, the Navy will make its decisions about the level of readiness for those ships. You're right about retention, and I think in some senses this is a product of having an economy which, against all the odds, particularly given COVID, has record levels of employment and actually historically low levels of unemployment, lower than many of our European partners, for example. And so the employment market is tight everywhere. One of the things I want to do is make sure that the people we've got stay. And one of the commitments I gave when I became Defence Secretary, for 5 months ago now, I guess, is that we can't expect our brave men and women to go abroad and fight for us and then come home and live in substandard accommodation. And we've got a £400 million programme which is being masterminded to help improve that accommodation, which will be one of the things which I hope holds people in the services happily for longer. We have a very big recruitment programme which I could take you with. And finally, look, on the 2.5%, we've been clear, we're moving towards it. Actually, I mentioned 50 billion. We're actually already at, I think, about 53.5 billion, including Ukraine expenditure. So we are putting a lot more into our military. On the Red Sea, nobody can say that we did not give the Iranian-backed Houthis every possible warning to cease and desist. We made it very clear. I worked very closely with our American allies on the messaging on this. We sent messages direct and indirectly to Iran and to the Houthis to say that time was running out. They decided on the 9th of January to enact an enormous mission hitting or trying to hit a lot of ships. This is illegal activity. We host the International Maritime Organization here in London. We are, if you like, in some senses, the guardians of this international free trade. It matters to us as an economy which brings 90% of our product in by sea. So we have hit the Houthis, as you said. We intend it as a single action. We'll now monitor very carefully to see what they do next, how they respond, and we will see from there. I can't predict the future for you. I can say that it is unacceptable to have a major sea passage in international waters with ships which have nothing to do with the Israel-Gaza conflict in most cases. Over 50 nations have had their ships attacked or had interest in ships that are attacked. That cannot continue, and it's absolutely right, and I think we can be proud of Britain and the US standing up to that with allies from a number of other countries assisting in that programme. George Grills at the Times. George.
Yeah, Secretary of State, you said that you intended the airstrikes as a single action, but clearly the Houthis have been able to launch fresh missiles, US warships. If the aim is to degrade the Houthis' capabilities with airstrikes, what can the UK and the US achieve that the Saudi-led coalition failed to achieve over 8 years? And would you rule out putting boots on the ground, as some might call for you to do? And if I may, just on defence spending, you talked about a record uplift, but the majority of that uplift is going to our nuclear deterrent. I think £9 of £11 billion of the uplift over the next 5 years. Dominic Cummings has talked about our nuclear infrastructure rotting. He sort of described it as a scandal hidden from public view. Should we be worried about our nuclear deterrent?
First of all, the battle that the Saudis were having with the Houthis for 8 years, as you say, was an entirely different setup. This wasn't about shipping being harassed, international shipping being harassed. So this is a different set of circumstances. In particular, we're very concerned that Iran provide the eyes and the ears, the intelligence, the materials, the funding to the Houthis. And so there's a very clear message to Iran in this action as well. And we've got those messages to Iran both directly and indirectly. I've spoken a lot to the Saudis, and of course they have now reached a peace treaty potentially with the Houthis. This is a completely separate situation, and I want to stress it's separate from the situation in Israel, Gaza. It's 2,600 kilometers away. That is the distance involved here. So the idea that the Houthis are sometimes... So this is a very distinct action, and as I said before, we'll wait to see what happens next. I should have mentioned to John before on the recruitment question, and your point about the increase in funding. It's certainly true that some of that funding is going to our nuclear enterprise, for sure. But actually, we gave a nearly 10% pay rise to our military this year, last year in the summer. I don't think there's another area of the public service that got more, and that's part of our attempts to ensure that we do hold on, maintain, and attract people to the sector. On nuclear infrastructure and enterprise, as you'll understand, we never comment in detail on this side of things, other than to say that for 54 years we've had continuous, unbroken, at-sea deterrent. That will always continue, and there is a massive investment. I think I mentioned the figure of £31 billion going into Dreadnought, and a huge amount of work, which now is cross-government in upgrading our nuclear industry. And of course, actually, having come from the energy sector, as Energy Secretary previously, I know that the level of skills and requirements in the civilian sector are also incredibly important to making sure that we enhance our overall ability in nuclear, both civilian and military. And this is the first time in anyone's living memory. You'd have to literally go back many, many decades to see us have a national endeavour which is helping to ensure that our nuclear defence is in the right place, and coincidentally also nuclear power. Tamara Cohen at Sky.
Given what you've said about the increasing dangers posed by non-state groups, how disappointed were you that some European countries did not take part in or support the airstrikes on the Houthis last week? And should we be concerned by apparent Western division there, considering we haven't ruled out further action? And can I also ask what your direct message is to some of Britain's allies in NATO who are still not meeting that 2% target?
Well, look, on the issue of European countries, I'm in touch with all of my the major European colleagues all the time, opposite numbers. And many of them will have a variety of different reasons that make it harder for them to do what the UK does. And sometimes it's based on their constitution, Second World War, post-war settlement. Sometimes there'll be other reasons. But I haven't spoken to anyone who hasn't congratulated us on the action that we've taken. It sort of goes to the heart of the part of the purpose of my speech, which I appreciate was wide-ranging and broad brush. But it is that when it comes to it, the United Kingdom is one of those countries which has always, traditionally, and continues to step up to the plate when it is needed. And I've no doubt at all other countries will continue to support, for example, the Prosperity Guardian operation, which is a much wider group of 20-plus countries, which includes almost all the main European, in fact, all the main European powers. So, we have the facilities to do this. As I mentioned, we have a special interest in shipping, hosting the IMO. We have the ability and the professionalism to do it, and I think that's part of what makes this country's military ability unique. 2% with NATO, yes, look, I said it in my speech. It is essential. I think I'm right in saying, last time I checked, only 7 NATO countries actually spend 2% and above. We are comfortably above. Of course, we want others to share that burden. I think it's absolutely critical, and that's why I'm saying in a sort of more contested world where the threats are greater, this is an inflection moment to actually ask members of NATO to look at their budgets and to come forward with the funds which bring them up to the level that NATO is committed to spending. So I think that it is really important. The important purpose of this speech today is to ensure that the whole of NATO does indeed share that burden. Dom Nichols, Telegraph.
Minister, thanks. Deter, lead, defend. So, deterrence, what's your measurement for how you know the Houthis have been deterred? What's the level of acceptable violence there that you would deem? Lead, you talked about support for Ukraine. What's your view on this idea from Estonia that if NATO members pledged 0.5% of GDP for Ukraine for 10 years, then it would, that would solve a lot of the problems there. And defend, you say we're now in a pre-war world, so does that mean that, that the numbers of military personnel in Britain's armed forces need to go up? Thank you.
So, first of all, I'm just writing down your 3 questions. Look, on deterrent, what level of attacks? Clearly, these are international waterways. They should be free and open. Freedom of navigation is an absolute principle in international law, and all civilized nations would agree with that. What's acceptable? Clearly, nothing's acceptable. What will bring action? We'll watch very carefully. We'll look at the patterns of what's happening. We'll check the capability. We'll, in particular, be interested to see those links between Tehran and the Houthis, to see whether we're monitoring whether there are shipments or whether we detect intelligence and the rest of it. So there are a lot of different factors that we'll take into account, along with our coalition partners, the Americans in particular. This isn't a sort of precise recipe, but what I can tell you is overall we've made the point very clearly that although this was a distinct piece of precisely targeted military action, we will not put up with a major waterway, major shipping lanes being closed on a permanent basis. Estonia, who are fantastic partners, we actually work very closely with the Estonians, have made a proposal, as you say, on Ukraine. I think in this country we can be incredibly proud of the support. You think the support package that the Prime Minister announced on Friday is bigger than the 2 previous ones. I think both were announced under Boris Johnson. So we are really leaning in because there is such obvious read across from what happens in Ukraine, and others will look at that and say, the West just gets bored if you leave them long enough. So therefore it will become more of an open season. It's critical that we win that. How we do it, there are lots of different ways to get there. There is a group called the Contact Group, which the United Kingdom started. That's countries who support Ukraine. There are 50 countries in that group, and we are constantly working together to get Ukraine what it needs. I talked about the new announcement on drones. I'll have more to say about that later. Absolutely cutting-edge stuff. But actually, we have worked very closely on helping the Ukrainians to open up the Black Sea from Crimea to be able to export again, and that helps them to get their economy going, and with their economy going, they can obviously help to pay for more of their war efforts. So there are many different ways to assist in Ukraine, all of which deserve looking at. Look, as a post-war, and we're now effectively pre-war, I suppose you could say that at any moment, because there's always likely, sadly, in humankind to be another war. Your question was specifically, I think, about troop numbers. I have taken the view, there's already been a series of reviews, defence papers, refreshers. I haven't changed the plans that were in place. But I often find, actually, especially just having conversations about the military, a lot of people confuse and conflate the precise number of troops you have, specifically in the army, with how well you are defended as a nation, whereas, as this discussion has revealed today, there are so many different elements to our deterrent and to our military assets, which go way beyond just a pure numbers calculation. And as we've seen in the conflicts, as I've seen in the 5 months I've been doing this job, there hasn't been a single deployment that I have not been able to make when I've needed to. The NATO asked us to go to Kosovo. We did that. We needed to secure the Red Sea with the attacks last week. We did that. We needed to provide more support to Ukraine. We've been able to do that. Even Guyana, who are a Commonwealth country who needed our support, we've been able to send HMS Trent there. We did that. So I find our military is incredibly capable. They are very can-do in attitude. We are getting the funding that they need to do the job, and this government's already committed to 2.5% when we can, so we're committed to doing even more. I am told there is time for one more question, so I'm going to go to Jerome Starkey of The Sun.
Secretary of State, thank you very much. First of all, on Iran and the Red Sea, I wonder if you could give us any indication of how Iran has responded to the joint strikes. I mean, for example, we understand there was an Iranian spy ship in the Red Sea that left on Thursday morning, and that felt like an overt signal. Could you talk both about overt and perhaps discrete signals that you've received from Tehran and whether or not they are continuing to support the Houthis as much or trying to rein them back in? And secondly, on GDP, I mean, you started by the references to Margaret Thatcher. Her government, before the peace dividend, was spending around 4.1% of GDP on defence. You've been on the record as saying you think the UK should spend 3% of GDP. I mean, as we appear to be in an election year, what do you think, what would you be comfortable with as the legacy, win or lose the election, the legacy of this government in terms of GDP, sort of setting a line in the sand? Would you be happy if they're still trying to get to 2.5, or do you think the UK should be exceeding that by the time voters go to the polls?
Jerome, thanks very much. Look, on Iran, I hope you'll forgive me not sharing the intelligence that we're gathering, even to such an august audience today. But of course, there's a lot of open source information out there as well. And we do know, as the Americans have said, that Iran have been providing equipment, they have been funding, they have been training, they have been providing eyes and ears and intelligence. So we see that the connection is very, very clear. As I said last week, we see you, we can see what you're doing. But I'm afraid I don't think I'm at liberty to go further on the specific intel on what's going on in Tehran. We just hope that this is a very, very clear message that has been sent, but we will see in time. On GDP, and I had it in my speech, I don't run away from it. I've spoken about GDP myself before. I was Defence Secretary, needing to go up, as you know, and it is certainly true to say that when Margaret Thatcher stood here, we were, during the Cold War, and spending more of GDP than we've needed to during the so-called peace dividend. I do just want to say, as we spend a lot more money, and in actual cash terms, more money than we've ever had, it's not just about how much money you spend. I'm standing here in front of the Defence Procurement Minister, James Cartledge, and he will tell you it's about how you spend that money and how efficiently the money is spent and how good the programs are and how much technology and productivity you're using. And I use the example of our new ships as a fantastic example of this, with aircraft carriers with about the same number of personnel that we might have had on a destroyer previously. I mean, it's an extraordinary advancement that technology brings you. So, yes, I want to see more money spent. Yes, we're pledged to do that as a government, but it's about how we spend that, and spending it intelligently is incredibly important as well. And it's a very good productivity point to end on as well. I just want to say a very big thank you to everybody for coming along today and joining me for this speech. I hope that you got something from it. Thanks for our friends in the media for turning up, and I hope you have a very good day. Thank you very much indeed.